Riffs and man I sing, a voice driven on by fate. He was the first to join the Sabbath's darkened gate. Well, greetings, fellow thinkers and drinkers, and welcome to this second in a series of three, I believe, videos where we take a look at the box sets, Super Deluxe, Deluxe editions, re-releases, I should say, um, that have come from Black Sabbath in the recent past. And we take a critical look at them, purely for the purpose of assessing their value, I think, to their target audience. And I think their target audience can legitimately be described as you and I, the long-term fan, the collector. They with multiple copies of everything they ever released. They who bought the t-shirts, gone to the concerts. They with more money than sense. Do these releases actually offer us anything? We shall see. Firstly, the classical parody here today was taken with the opening lines of Virgil's Aeneid. With the opening lines of Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas flees from Troy, the burning remnants of Troy, and with an effort to reestablish his career, his people, somewhere else, which would eventually become Rome. So I hope with some artistic license, you will see, or that will be instructive and indicative enough to know that we are now going to discuss the Dio era and the releases assumed there from. Okay. How did this come about? Well, sometime around 2020, Mr. Iommi, in interview, when asked directly about the Super Deluxe editions of the Aussie era, said, well, now we've dealt with that, we're going to concentrate on the Dio stuff. I said, okay, which is an interesting comment, since they'd only four of the eight available albums had received the Super Deluxe box set treatment. Discussed that in my previous video. Please check that out for further information about that. But because of that, these subsequent releases, Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, and ultimately Live Evil, I think it comes from the horse's mouth. It's safe to say that they formed part of the same project, if nothing else. First thing to note is both Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, when they did come out, which is 2021, so roughly a year after this announcement, did not receive the Super Deluxe box set treatment. No, they were released individually as a 2 CD digipack. So missing the box, missing the 4 CD presentation, missing the hardback book, missing the poster, whatever, the other accoutrement that accompanied the Aussie era box sets. Now, I've already made my opinion on those clear. Anybody wants to know, please refer to the previous video. I am not that impressed, but again, don't want to repeat myself too much at this point. Initially, this appeared to be a deliberate slight. But as we all know, we all know that Black Sabbath achieved much artistic and commercial success without Osborne being in the band. But if you ever find yourself at Black Sabbath corporate towers, be careful to whom you say that. The Dio era is granted its own grudging acknowledgement, I admit, but that is not the narrative that is being pushed, and we all know what that is. But like many narratives that are pushed, especially today, it has very little to do with the actual reality. Maybe a deliberate slight, maybe not, but there was obviously some reason why they abandoned the box set format even. There had to be some particular reason for that. Don't know why, but they did. So there we have it. Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules were released, as I said, in dual disc digipacks in 2021. So having set the scene, I am now going to fortify myself with my harmful but legal substance of choice, and then we can commence with Heaven and Hell. I will be back. Okay, so what exactly did we get for our money? Now, fair to say, and I'm trying to be fair as I can be, that because they were not presented in the box set format, they were priced lower, more affordably. But before we get on to what we actually received, I think it's worth just reviewing something else. Now, my own personal purchase history with Heaven and Hell was the initial vinyl, the Castle Communications remaster in the mid '90s. There may have been other releases which I ignored for the simple reason I didn't think they offered anything new. That would include the Rules of Hell box set that came out at some point, can't quite remember, early 2000s, which was just packaging together, perhaps even remastered, of all of Dio's contributions up until including Dehumanizer. Felt I could safely ignore that one. So I had been listening to presumably the Castle remaster until 2010, when Heaven and Hell was released in a double disc digipack format, also titled Deluxe Edition. Now, this will get confusing, so please pay attention. I will try to be as clear as I can. It's in terms of what we're actually here to discuss, which is the 2021 edition, it is worth just taking a moment to examine what we got in 2010. So the first disc was the album remastered. Did it sound better than the Castle remaster? For the life of you, the life of me, I cannot remember. But it became my go-to version of Heaven and Hell. It sounded fine. There may have been some improvement. I don't know. 15 years later, technology improves. I don't know. Maybe even they remastered it from other tapes. I don't know. I genuinely can't remember. However, what was interesting was the so-called second disc, which contains 7 songs. Um, a live version of Children of the Sea, which had been a B-side of the Neon Night single back in the day, when the album and the singles were new. A live version of Heaven and Hell, which was the B-side of the Die Young single back in the day. And I'm sure this is the reason we all bought it, a mono single mix of Lady Evil. Come on, admit it. That's really why we bought this. That was supplemented with 4 songs taken from what then was one of the more common Black Sabbath bootlegs in existence. Namely the Hartford, Connecticut show, August, wasn't it? 1980. Must have been one of the last shows Bill performed before he quit the band. So we got Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, Heaven and Hell, Die Young. Yes, fine. I'm sure they cleaned up the sound. I'm sure they did something to it. It was all very good. I haven't listened to the bootlegs for that long. I don't know. But we have an official release of this, which is fine. So buying this deluxe edition offered us something new. And I was happy with it. Happy is a very relative term, isn't it? Okay, let's move on to what we're actually here to discuss. The 2021 Deluxe Edition. So the first disc is Quelle Surprise, another remaster of the original album. Now, again, I don't know if this is a remastered from what, by whom. I'm sure I could find this out. But the basic point is it offers nothing new. This is, to my ears, there's no difference between this and the 2010 version. Again, please, if you think I'm a cloth-eared fool, write in the comments below. But don't. If I have to start downloading software and looking for frequency differences between 2 comparable songs. Not interested. If the differences are not audible, I've got decent equipment. If the differences are not audible, they do not exist. Okay? So we get this bloody superfluous remaster. Then we look at the second disc, which has a ring of familiarity about it. And there's a good reason for that, because it is exactly the same as the second disc on the 2010 Deluxe Edition. And I mean exactly. The first 7 songs, at least, are exactly. Okay? Which means we've already got it. As simple as that. They have supplemented it, however. But before you get too excited, they've supplemented it with 4 songs, which is sorry, it's an exaggeration, with three songs, because one of them is E5150, which was purely a taped introduction to the live concerts. And also, since this is the Heaven and Hell album, and surely anything they play should be from the Heaven and Hell tour, E5150 only appeared on the Mob Rules. It is incongruous here. Small point, perhaps, but then we get another version of Neon Nights. So that's two live versions of Neon Nights on the second disc. A third live version of Children of the Sea on the second disc, and a third live version of Heaven and Hell on this second disc. They are sourced from the Live at Hammersmith album that came out several years ago, and it's actually a fine album. Much better live representation of Black Sabbath than was Live Evil. No two ways about it. But we already have it. Anybody who bought this has that. And that's it. That's all you get. I think this is appalling. Absolutely appalling. Cash grab doesn't do it justice. I cannot for the life of me recommend purchasing this, especially if you already have the 2010 remaster. This offers nothing. If you have no version of Heaven and Hell at all, then fine, whatever. Buy it. It's a great album, and the live stuff is nice to have, obviously. If you're not a fanatic and not a collector, you don't have multiple copies of this, fine, buy it, yes. But as a representative of the target audience, I feel ill done to, ill done by, misused. Well, there you have it. That was Heaven and Hell, and that's very stressful, I have to say. So I'm going to take a brief break. And, oh no, I'm not going to take a brief break yet because I haven't done my improvements, have I? Silly of me, because that's perhaps the most interesting thing I've got to say, at least in regard to these CDs. As I did with the Aussie era stuff, I looked at the package, the musical content of the box sets, and how could this have been made better? I even made suggestions for those box sets that were not released. And I think, modesty, with all modesty, that my suggestions were at least more interesting and would have presented more value for money to the target audience member, the collector, than what actually was delivered. So how can we make this better? Well, depressingly fucking easy, I have to say. The first thing they could do to make this better value for money was not to have released it. I have to say that sounds harsh, but it's true. But they're not going to miss an opportunity. Now, I said towards the end of my review of the Aussie era stuff that these remasters are utterly superfluous, and I'm going to stand by that. So I would junk it completely. That means that the first disc in my fantasy set here would be a Steven Wilson remix. He's already proven that he has both the technical ability and respect for the material and sympathy with the material and understanding for the material to produce sympathetic, interesting remixes. So I'd let him have a go. Not that Heaven and Hell was ever a badly produced album or it sounded bad or anything like that, but one could say that the production was a little bit focused on the mid-range and perhaps some bass frequencies, additional bass frequencies, or whatever he deemed necessary, something new. That would be the first disc. The second disc is even easier. Although politically utterly impossible. We all know that when they first started to write Heaven and Hell, Ozzy was still in the band, and Naomi has gone on record as saying that there are takes of what would become Children of the Sea, at least, with Ozzy singing something over it. Where there's one, there's two. I'm sure there's other stuff out there. Would we like to hear that? Is the Pope a Catholic? Would we be now more willing to spend our hard-earned cash on something like this? You bet. Move on. When Dio takes over, we already know this stuff out there because it was a couple of years ago. It leaked from the estate, didn't it, of the late Jeff Nichols. There was a embryonic version of Heaven and Hell and an unreleased track, I think, called Slapback, which was what it was, but we hadn't heard it before. You're telling me there isn't more stuff out there? There isn't enough to make a CD of outtakes? I don't believe it. There has to be. Now, I know, I know the politics of this. And you may well be thinking, Yuri, if you think this is ever going to happen, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. Have to accept that. I'm just saying it could and is possible to make these things interesting and value for money. Now, try and duplicate the four disc format of the original Super Deluxe box sets. What to do? Well, I would do something like the following. I have in my collection a really great bootleg from Offenbach early in Germany, very early on in the Heaven and Hell tour. Bill was still playing. This was 15 dates in. They were still working the new lineup up, and they were also still playing Lonely as the Word, which unfortunately they dropped all too quickly. You could take that sort, and it sounds damn good as it is, but you could clean that up and say, okay. And then take another show, which I could pick one from Japan towards the end of the tour. Obviously, Vinny Appice is now playing on the drums. Unfortunately, they have dropped Lonely as the Word and replaced it with the vastly inferior Lady Evil, but okay. Then, even when it comes to the booklet, we could have had something interesting. The booklet, it tells the same story. We know what happened, why Ozzy left was fired. We know how Tony met Ronnie Dio. We know that. We've read it 1,000 times. We've heard the stories. We know we don't need to reread this. But if we had the outtakes and we had the two live shows I've just discussed, then you could compare and contrast. Because Black Sabbath live back then with Ward and Apathy was a very different beast. There is enough there's enough there for an interesting essay to make the booklet even worthwhile. So could it be done? Yes, of course it could be done. As it is, I'm sorry, this is just not acceptable, in my opinion. Please feel free to disagree. But does this get a pass as a release? No, not even close. Not even close. Now, I'm going to calm down for a moment, and then we can get on with the mob rules. Right, suitably refreshed. Can be quite distressing, a band you really like, just, having to be so critical about it, but I believe in honesty, up to a point. Okay, so that was Heaven and Hell. Mob Rules, released at the same time, same format. Now, again, my purchase history with Mob Rules, probably exactly the same as with Heaven and Hell, the original vinyl, the Castle remaster. Anything else I ignored, including the Rules of Hell box set. So, again, let's repeat the process because it is almost identical here. 2010, they came, the 2010 Deluxe Edition, Mob Rules, which contains the album remastered. I'm going to say exactly the same I did for Heaven and Hell. I couldn't tell the difference really, I don't think, between that and the Castle remaster. Sounds great. The other one didn't sound bad. But the first disc includes. Do this in English, they tell me. Do this in English. You have a much greater audience if you do this in English. Yeah, great. Yeah. I'm going to do them in Latin from now on. So this included two extra tracks, Die Young, which was the live B-side of the Mob Rules single, although the source of the song, I'm sorry, I can't tell you, and the heavy metal mix of Mob Rules. Most of us have heard this, but was this the first time they were released officially as part of the re-release of the album? Possibly, I don't know. I'm not going to quibble too much about that, other than say that, again, the utter pointlessness of the remaster. The second disc is exactly the Live at Hammersmith show. It is exactly that, okay, which we already have. I don't know if they did anything to it, if they remastered it. I've got absolutely no idea. But since I already had it, yeah, didn't offer me anything new. Because it wasn't the greatest purchase I ever made. But we now come on to the 221. Wow. I need to put more water in my wine. The 2021 edition that we are actually billed here as a 40th anniversary edition, not just simply a deluxe edition. I'd forgotten that. but part of what we're here to discuss. Right, okay, so we get the obligatory remaster. Nothing new to say about that. My opinions remain the same. Um, that is supplemented by the Mob Rules heavy metal soundtrack, which is exactly the same as on the 2010 edition. Exactly the same Die Young live B-side, plus the Mob Rules 2021 mix. It has been remixed. Sounds fine. Different, yes. You can hear that. You can hear it's different. I mean, if you're actually listening to it, you can hear there are some differences there. The first disc then was a bit of a fucking mess, to be honest with you. Um, we then get Country Girl Slipping Away, Mob Rules, and Voodoo from the aforementioned Live at Hammersmith that was released on its own and was the second disc of the 2010 deluxe edition of Mob Rules. Repetition again. We've got this. They picked the four songs from the Mob Rules, I think, that were played that evening. I think that's correct. Yeah, should be, yeah. Because they did mix up their set list a little bit on this tour, but more of which later. Side two then concludes with E5150 and Neon Nights, which is, once we get to the second disc, will be the rest of the show, which is an entire concert from Portland, Maine in April of 2000. Fuck, really? Of 1982. It is exactly the same set as Live Evil. And as I've said before, even more so in the early 80s, where, live jamming was sort of, no becoming perhaps passé, and bands were adapting the structures of their live shows. Sabbath were a conservative band in some regards. They were very well rehearsed and they played to a very high standard. But the difference in presentation from night to night is not that noticeable. This is not Deep Purple. Okay? This is not Led Zeppelin. This is not some jazz fusion band. No. They're tight and they're great. But you've heard one. I'm not saying you've heard them all, but it, one has to start to question the value of having, effectively Live Evil from a different show, or shows, as Live Evil was a composite. But none of the composite shows were one of these. So it is new material if we're going, if we're being honest about it, I suppose. It is new material. But it is effectively the same show. And listening to them back to back, there's not a huge difference. It sounds good. I like it. And yes, we haven't had it before. But what could they have done then? I mean, I don't know. This is, well, obviously, I've decided, I've made a unilateral decision with junking the remasters as being superfluous and worthless. So we could have had Steven Wilson remix this, which is slightly ironic, as Mob Rules is probably one of the best produced, best sounding albums the band ever had. But there was enough on that one remix of the title track to suggest that somebody, and I don't know who did it, I can't find out, or I can't remember who did it, that somebody with an understanding and some sympathy for the band, from the music, could produce an interesting remix. So that would be that. The second disc, however, if we're trying to replicate the four-disc sets of the Aussie era, is very easy. Iommi has gone on record as saying that he was ultimately dissatisfied with the Mob Rules. And they ended up discarding material that he felt to be superior to what was ultimately included on the album. The second disc, therefore, speaks for itself. Let us hear it. Please just let us hear it. In terms of live stuff, it becomes tricky because, again, what I would say is at the beginning of the tour, they were playing Turn Up the Night and Falling Off the Edge of the World, which were quickly discarded. So if they could source some live versions of those and incorporate them somewhere, it would at least be something we haven't heard before. And then, given the other live releases from the tour, we would have a live version of every song from the album that made it to the stage, which was every song with the exception of Over and Over. So they could have done that. But again, given, this this concert, it's fine, but is it fundamentally different? It sounds better than Live Evil, but then again, the sound of the dog breaking wind sounds better than Live Evil. So I don't know. This is getting difficult. I have to be honest. Although, actually, no, I don't. No, sorry. I have no. There is something they could do, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, and we'll have to come back to it uh, shortly. So again, sorry, Mob Rules does not really get a pass. It is a better release than the Heaven and Hell release, purely for the remix of the title track, for what it's worth, and the fact that you do get a new concert release that we haven't heard before. So it has some value. Not much, but it has some. All right. We will be back and we will delve into Live Evil, where things are about to take a slight turn toward the positive. Slight. Okay, all of this brings us to Live Evil. This came out in 2023, and for this release, they returned to the Super Deluxe Box Edition. So the Dio era does get that, at least on this release. Okay, it's again a 4-disc release. It comes with a tour program, a replica tour program, the wonderful folded poster, and the hardback book. Yes, a hardback book. Yeah. Again, I've made my opinion on these things clear enough. I think they're nice to have. Don't think there's anything in them that we didn't already know. We've seen the photographs, most of them. It's nice to have. It's an excuse to jack up the price. It's not really offering us that much, I don't think. But all right, okay. I've already discussed that. So now, what do we actually get in terms of music? Well, we get a double CD remaster of Live Evil. Whoopee! I have never been a fan of this album. Never. Not the performances. It's the recording and the production of it. Killed it dead. It died at birth. Produced by Iommi, it was sterile beyond belief. In fact, you could have shipped copies of this to various hospitals around the world, and doctors could have used them as emergency operating tables. So sterile was the original release. Never liked it. Never did. One of the most disappointing releases. That's a very subjective opinion, obviously, but of the bands I really like and spent a lot of time following, this really was, yeah, just awful, really. Given that and my my already avowed distaste for the remaster, you can probably guess where this is going. However, the third and the fourth disc represent a complete remix of the original album by a apparently long time associate of the band, Wyn Davis. My God. This puts some serious foot to buttock, which I again believe is the correct idiom. Night and day. It's a different fucking album. It sounds live. It does what a live album should do. It should, if you close your eyes and drink enough, you should be able to visualize being there. It sounds great. What was just so uninspired and turgid on the original mix just comes to life. It is difficult to do justice in words. Had this been released with this mix back in the day, I think Live Evil would have been, one, probably more successful, and two, certainly better. They would have received much better critical reception and would enjoy a better critical acclaim today. This is wonderful. Really, it is. It is that good. Does this release get a pass? I can't help myself, can I? No. Box set price for one remix. All right. How could they improve this? The two things they could have done, in my opinion. The first thing would just to have released this as a double CD, digipack, as they did Heaven and Hell Mob Rules. Okay, the remix, obviously, not the King remaster, the remix. Okay, or alternatively, When we were discussing the mob rules just now, I was struggling when it came to the live aspect of the box set. What they could have done is put the Live Evil remix along with the Mob Rules remix and the outtake discs. That would have been a good idea. I know what you're saying. What? Forgo an opportunity to get them to fork out for two releases instead of one? Are you insane? You never studied marketing? Yes, I know. I get the argument. I do. But as I'm saying, I really do think these things are pushing the boundaries of decency almost in terms of being value for money. And really, they're taking the fans for a ride. But they could have done that. They could have released it as a single, as a standalone release, or they could have incorporated it with the Mob Rules release. I think would have been fairer, more equitable for all concerned. And it's not as if they need the money. And on that point, I'm going to make a more general comment that I'm going to appeal to the better nature, better angel of Mr. Iommi's nature. Note not Mrs. Osborne's. That, Tony, I can call you Tony, can't I? If you decide that these, outtakes, whatever that we've discussed, you do not want to make them publicly available, that is your decision. We'll accept it at some point. You don't owe us anything. But there is a quid pro quo to that. Stop re-releasing the same shit. Give it a slightly different title. Give it a remaster, which I'm sorry, no longer, in my opinion, counts as anything new or particularly valuable. I think it's a con, to be honest. And expecting us to buy it, it is a matter of respect. Really, stop doing this. Stop it. I don't know if anything else is going to come. Well, I know something did come out because we're going to discuss it next time, the Tony Martin stuff, but that's all a slightly different situation, which we'll get into next time. So that's it, the Dio era. I don't know if anything will ever happen with Dehumanizer. I certainly hope not. Again, I'm sure there is stuff out there that they could do to make that interesting, especially anything with Tony Martin on it, but that will never get released. Maybe there's less there than one imagines, although from the State of the Lake Cozy Powell, some stuff did leak out, some songs that they recorded but didn't make it onto the album. One has to assume there is more. For years, one did hope that there was effectively a version of Dehumanizer that was perhaps musically identical, but featuring Tony Martin's lyrics and melodies. Not like, as with Live Evil, where he just replicated Ray Gillen's, well, not his lyrics, Bob Daisley's lyrics and Ray Gillen's melodies, but where it actually had input into it. Now, apparently that's something of a misnomer, and I think Martin himself has poured cold water on that, said it doesn't exist, or nothing. It doesn't exist in its entirety. There are bits and pieces here. Unfortunate. That would have been more than interesting. Otherwise, I don't know. That's going to be it, I think. As I said in the last video, for some reason they stopped with the, well, we discussed why they've decided to stop with the Aussie era stuff. Maybe Born Again is the other obvious candidate. Maybe we'll get something at some point. You keep hearing about it. I keep hearing summer's coming, but it's still fucking raining outside. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's about it. Now, I've expressed my feelings on this and on the Dio era in particular. Now, anybody that's interested in hearing these thoughts expanded, I did venture into print. There's a book out there. It's called Heaven or Hell, where I reappraise Dio's impact on Black Sabbath. Okay, from 1979 up into, including the gaps, obviously, Heaven and Hell project. My views are probably not common, but there is a link in the description. It's available on Amazon. I've linked it to Amazon.com and one or two others, but because it's only available on Amazon and print on demand, it is available in your market at your price. Okay, so anybody's interested in that, feel free to read it and comment on it. What do I know? Okay, that's the Aussie stuff done. It remains as far as these just box set discussions. There's only the Tony Martin stuff. We'll get onto that next time. I think I've said enough for now. Again, you know what to do. Comments, share, subscribe, like. None of these things I am reliably informed cause physical or emotional distress. So if you feel like doing them, please just do it. And well, that's about it for now. We will see each other again when we get up to the Tony Martin era. So, with thanks, I say, a bientôt. Yeah, machonkier. Ciao, ciao.